Aloha. Thank you so much for watching Lucy's Paradise podcast. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and do a solo episode reviewing some of the top Netflix series shows that are on right now. Before I do that, I'm just going to kind of give you guys a brief synopsis or whatever, brief description of what season 2 is going to look like. So season 2 of Lucy's Paradise podcast is going to be a little bit different. I think a lot of you have already seen that I have some Zoom like type interviews that I've already been posting. Um, this allows me to be able to connect with people that are, in other places of the world, as well as I'm still doing interviews that are in person. So you will see a little bit more of a mix of that for this season. And yeah, so hopefully you guys like that. I'll be able to have like my brother on. Coming up, we're going to have Amanda Jester on. You guys don't know that much about her right now. There's actually a movie being made about her. And when I conduct that interview, we're doing that later this week. You'll be able to hear more about her and her story. If you do Google her name, though, you'll be able to see about that. It's really interesting. Don't want to give too much away. However, also I will give disclosures on which shows I'm going to go over. So if you haven't watched it yet, I don't want to ruin it for you. So I'll let you know. But the first one I want to talk about is American Murder, Gabby Petito, the Netflix miniseries. These are my favorite. I like these. I love investigative shows. Now, obviously, I don't love that something tragic happened to somebody, right? That's horrible. But I find it really interesting to watch investigations like in the very beginning when they have no idea who could be responsible. And then once the pieces all start coming together, I find it really fascinating because I like to try to figure out, who I think maybe did it or whatever. It's a lot of fun. I've always been attracted to any type of investigative things. Um, that is basically what I do for a living as an investigator. But um, I find it really interesting. This one I did hear about. I remember when this happened, and I did hear about it, and I really didn't read too much about it. And then the news broke, I guess, about the boyfriend and his body. I think his body being discovered, or like his belongings being discovered. This is an interesting one, all right? So the American Murder, Gabby Petito. It's a three-part Netflix miniseries. It dives into the tragic case of Gabby Petito. She was a vlogger who disappeared during a cross-country trip with her fiance, Brian Laundrie. The series examines the events leading up to her disappearance, a subsequent investigation, and the discovery of her remains in Wyoming. It features interviews with Petito's family and friends, providing insight into her life and the circumstances surrounding her death. The docuseries also explores Laundrie's actions following Petito's disappearance and his eventual death by suicide. What's really interesting about this particular case, and this is one of the things that I remember, and obviously, mentally, if you hear just certain pieces, you're like, oh, yeah, he did it, right? You don't really know all of that specifically. If you're like that close to an investigation, you can't really say that. You have to provide proof, right? But from an outside perspective looking in, I remember she was missing and she was with him traveling right in that van, but then he came back to where he lived and he had the van, but she wasn't with him. That was super weird. Um, Also, if you watch the series, you're going to see the portion, which is my favorite part, very telling for any police officer or outside perspective, is when the police show up to his parents' house to, let them know that she's missing, ask about her vehicle in the driveway, and try to talk to him. The parents immediately say that they don't want to say anything and that they have an attorney, and then they gave the police the attorney's number. Now, ideally, it's a great step if you're involved, right? Is if you're involved in anything this serious, it's great to get your lawyer involved and not say anything, right? Usually, when you have something to do with it, not in all cases. I think there's a reasonable expectation to be able to protect yourself right? Because, there's tons of cases where, the wrong people go into jail for certain things, whatever. However, in a missing person or disappearance case, if you have nothing to do with it, it's really easy to just be like, I don't know where she's at. X, Y, and Z is when I last saw her, and we'll go from there. Just the fact that like he had zero corroboration and didn't like get interviewed by the police and stuff like that, very suspicious. But not too weird to have a lawyer. That's not too weird, but just the zero corroboration part, I think, is the most suspicious part of that. The other really weird thing is, and by the way, the parents actually got sued by Gabby's parents, and then they settled for like $2 million for what they thought was obstructing the investigation. I don't really know how I feel about that, but it is what it is. I mean, who knows? I think any parents would probably kind of be in the same position, but I don't know what they knew. When they talked about his cell phone records and things that he did immediately after, around the time they think that she was murdered, he had like a 56-minute phone call to his mom. So we can make assumptions of what that phone call was about. And, what would you do if you were involved? That's your first phone call. What are you saying? I don't know. But I mean, it kind of sucks for the parents because you kind of put your parents in a weird position too, right? Because now, after the fact, they got sued. So it's interesting. It's really, really interesting because it makes me think about like, oh my God, what would I do? Also, there was a letter that came about from his mom that specifically talked about how loyal she was to her son, Brian, and saying that she would hide a body for him and blah, blah, blah. Not great that letter existed. And she even wrote burn after reading or whatever on it. Not good. Very not good. Now, it doesn't admit that you did anything, right? But it's not a good look. You know what I mean? It's the perception, I would say, of it. Anyway, that one's really interesting. I hope I didn't ruin it. If you haven't watched it, I'm so sorry. I'm going to put in the thumbnail and stuff that I don't, or whatever on the description that I don't want to ruin these shows for you guys. So please, if I'm going over some of these shows and you haven't watched it, feel free to click out of the video for now. And then after you watch it, please come and watch again. And then please like and subscribe as well. I really appreciate it. I would love to get to 500 subscribers by the end of this year. That's kind of my goal. So any new subscriber, I greatly appreciate. Also, if you're already subscribed and you like a specific video, I would love for you to comment on it. Any of your thoughts about anything that I talk about, or just post it maybe on your Facebook or repost things if you see them on my story or whatever. I would greatly appreciate that. Finally, the next one is the Scott Peterson case. This one was interesting because I actually, at one point when I lived in the Bay Area, I got a inside tour to San Quentin. And during this time, Scott Peterson was actually there temporarily. I think he was getting retried or something was going on. And the warden there explained where he was at in the prison. And it literally was a part of the prison that high up that had like the best view of the Bay Area. And I thought that was like so ironic and so crazy. But anyway, 2002, Lacey Peterson, who was 8 months pregnant, was reported missing from her home in Modesto, California. Her husband, Scott Peterson, became the prime suspect after inconsistencies in his statements and evidence of an extramarital affair. In 2003, the bodies of Lacey and her unborn son, Connor, were discovered in the San Francisco Bay. Scott Peterson was arrested and in 2004 convicted of first-degree murder for Lacey's death and second-degree murder for Connor's death. He was sentenced to death, but in 2020, his death sentence was overturned and he was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This one was really interesting because Scott Peterson was a very stoic Um, I mean, all of his expressions, he was very stoic, never, not really crying, not really super emotional, very, very controlled. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, of course, just because you don't show emotion like that doesn't mean that you're a murderer. But a lot of the evidence pointed to him. There was like a discrepancy between him saying that he was golfing that morning or that he was fishing that morning, things like that. And the fact that he was fishing and then her body was found in the San Francisco Bay, super odd. I know her hair was found on something that was in his boat. So that's weird. A lot of his behaviors were super weird as well. And then obviously lying about having an affair. You can't say your marriage is great, but then you're having it was just weird. Like things didn't add up with that one. I also remember when that happened. That was crazy. Really, really nuts. And just so sad. So sad for Lacey's family and her unborn child. It's just really sad. Like seeing all the pictures, with her and her friends talking about that. What I did like was that Amber Fry, the woman that he had an affair with, she kind of did all she could in terms of giving the police everything that she knew. And then she ended up going to court and stuff. And then the friends of Lacey kind of gave her some credit and were like, we appreciate you doing that. That must have been really rough. I would have not loved to be in that position, being like the quote unquote mistress, not exactly, because but being the side chick or whatever of someone whose wife went missing, and it's such a big media display. That shit's wild. So credit to her. I could not imagine being in that position. Obviously, she was doing the right thing by being cooperating with police and things like that. And that's what people have to realize too, is the cooperation with police really goes a long way, but God, I could not imagine. That's a nightmare. All right, so we'll go away from the sad ones because those are sad, right? It's always so tragic when things like that happen. And the only message I can give out to people is, to just try to really be aware of your surroundings, be aware of people that you surround yourself with. And, always, me and my brother and my close friends, we always have our locations. I always kind of tell my brother my plan. And just, if you hang around with, real shady people, I don't know, I wouldn't do that. But, but yeah, my brother, I always get worried about him because he'll like go out and like, downtown LA, or not downtown LA, but like West Hollywood, or like, somewhere in LA. And there's just so many people there. You never know. So sometimes he'll call me when he's like in the Uber home or something, or on the way home and stuff like that. So just try your best to be as safe as possible. And it helps if your family and your friends, especially if you're going traveling or whatever, they know where you're at. All right. So I'm really excited about this one to talk about. And I hope you guys are too. Love is Blind, season 8. Now, as you guys know, I'm like famously single, so this is the closest thing I have to any type of dating is watching Love is Blind. But I love watching it. It's so cute to watch other people fall in love. Sometimes I get a little emotional at times. But I like to watch like the interactions with these people in the beginning and then kind of like guess who's going to end up with who. That's kind of the fun part of it. I don't think I really need to explain what Love is Blind is, but I still will. The 8th season of Netflix's reality series Love is Blind features singles from Minneapolis engaging in a social experiment where they date and become engaged without seeing each other. Hence, Love is Blind. The season showcases 5 couples who, after forming connections in the pods, travel to Honduras to test their relationships. As they return to their daily lives, they face challenges integrating their relationship into the real world, dealing with family, friends, and social media influences. The season is noted for its unique dynamics influenced by Midwestern culture. I think the most interesting thing about this last season is how many like social media things like interfered in the relationships. I found it really, really interesting. And I started to think to myself, I wonder what Love is Blind would have been like back in the 70s or back in 80s or even 90s, right? Where we did the same experiment, but there's no cell phones really. I mean, there is cell phones, but it's just the way that social media is now was so different, right, than back then. So I was thinking about that. I was like, dang, like I wonder what it would have been like. But I found it interesting that there were a couple couples that were affected by some. I guess technically one of the couples was affected by social media stuff. Um, so the Sarah and Ben couple, I don't know if you guys remember that. If you haven't watched the show, you're not going to even understand what I'm saying anyway. But I would appreciate if you did watch the podcast another time. But Sarah and Ben. So Sarah's the 29-year-old oncology nurse. Ben's the 28-year-old developer. That was the one where, and it seems very scripted in that season episode where she basically discovers a TikTok that some girl made and she's crying and it's about Ben basically or whatever. And it's interesting because first of all, they kind of look related. They like if you told me they were brother and sister, I would believe it. I don't know if that's just because they're both good looking or what, but like anyway, feel free to disagree with me. But I guess there was some girl who dated Ben or something at some point, and then she created a TikTok and she was all crying, being like, they should stop having shitty men on these shows or whatever. And then, so obviously that gets in the way of Sarah and Ben's relationship and they start arguing about that and like figuring that out. That kind of stuff sucks. That kind of stuff sucks in relationships. But the only thing that I can say with that is that, everybody has their own perception of things. And so that makes it hard. And it makes it really hard to judge somebody based on an experience they had with somebody else, right? And so it seems in that episode where Sarah confronts Ben and they're talking about it, it seems like she's taking it with a grain of salt. She doesn't seem to just like, feel weird about him and like kind of not trust him at all. So I don't know. I did like them as a couple. I think they were one of my favorites. Taylor and Daniel were one of my favorites. Wait. Oh yeah. Wait. Taylor. Was that my favorite? I know Sarah and Ben were my favorite. Oh, Dave. That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, Lauren and David. I think they were my second favorite. That one was interesting because I guess Lauren had some friends with benefits shortly before getting on the show, and then David's all like butthurt about it and can't get past it. And then. I think that's more of a David issue, The girl's like crying, like so frustrated about this thing that she thinks is just meaningless. And it's so stuck in David's mind and he's like replaying all these things over and over. And that sucks because he has friends that knew the guy. So I can understand that when you have your friends kind of telling you stuff and you trust your friends, you know what I mean? So when your friends tell you stuff, it's really hard to be like, wait, is my friend of how many years lying to me or some girl I just met on this reality show? So that's a hard one. That's a hard one. I think there's another episode coming out on the 27th. Yeah, the 27th. So I think we're going to kind of learn the conclusion of that on that episode. I think hopefully they'll just get over it. I think David's kind of just being a little bitch about it. And like if someone says it wasn't a big deal, like I would try my best to believe them over my friends, because I think that, I don't know. I think from watching like Lauren's interactions and stuff, she seems like a really trustworthy and like genuine person. So that's just my perspective. Like I would have just believed her. But I guess I also don't understand like how close David is with his friends. So I say that, but who knows? But Love is Blind season 8 was really interesting. There was the Virginia and Devin couple. They talked a lot about like prenups and stuff like that. I found that interesting. I think that I don't know, you can kind of see when they're talking about that like it feels like Devin's not really, it feels like he's kind of just going along. I don't know that he 100%, I don't know, I didn't really believe him when he talked about being fine with the prenup stuff. Like he seemed like it kind of bothered him. So I don't know how that plays out later on in the next few episodes. But that was interesting. I think that like it's more normal nowadays, the whole prenuptial agreement thing. I personally like don't see issues with it. So yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I wonder how that's going to play out in that part for them. The last show, which is like super super weird to me that like this could even happen. So Apple Cider Vinegar. Don't know if you guys have watched this. Apple Cider Vinegar is. Oh wait, what is this? Wait, hold on. So it's basically that show. So Apple Cider Vinegar. This one is about a girl who lies about having brain cancer and creates this like app and this whole brand basically promoting being healthy, and is basically saying that all of these health things that she did helped her beat her cancer or whatever. I don't know how the hell she could get away with that for so long. That's crazy to me. And they have like 2 different versions of the show on Netflix right now. They have one that's like an actual documentary, and then they have one that's like they changed all the names, and they have it's like a series. I don't know. It's not a documentary. It's just basically like a reenactment of the whole thing. So I'm watching that one. I haven't finished the other one, but it's really interesting. I don't know how she would have got away with that. That seems very, very odd and strange to me. And it's so nuts to like pretend you have a cancer. I feel like that's super bad juju. Like, don't do that. That's it's like I can't believe someone is insane enough to lie about that. It reminds me of, I don't know if you guys heard of Tania Head or Alicia Head. I don't know if she goes by one of those names. She's a Spanish woman who like pretended she survived 9/11. That's what it reminds me of. So I'll read you a little bit about her. So Tania Head was a Spanish woman who falsely claimed to be a survivor of September 11, 2001 attack on the World Trade Center. She alleged that she was on the 78th floor of the South Tower during the attacks, sustaining severe injuries, and that her fiancé Dave perished in the North Tower. Her compelling narrative led to becoming a prominent member of the World Trade Center Survivors Network, eventually serving as its president. However, investigation in 2007 revealed that Head was in Barcelona attending classes during the time of the attacks, and her entire survival story was fabricated. Following the exposure of her deception, she withdrew from public life. Her story is detailed in the documentary, The Woman Who Wasn't There. I watched that this past year. That's what the lady in Apple Cider Vinegar reminds me of. That's nuts to like pretend that you are either have cancer or that you survived something tragic. That's insane. But still very interesting. Watch Apple Cider Vinegar. That's my reviews. Thank you so much for watching. Those are my Netflix top reviews. And please like and subscribe. And thanks again for watching Lucy's Paradise Podcast. Aloha.